Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? That's the evil queen in Snow White that asks herself that question. And I think many of us modern people also ask ourselves that question. And if the answer is not me, many people's world will implode. First of all, welcome back to Virtual Wellbeing. Good to see you all again. And as you know by now, my name is Lars Hansen, and we're trying to look at issues, not necessarily just psychiatric issues, but things that are important for our mental well-being. And looks is definitely one of them. So we're going to hone in on looks. And of course, we all have them, and some of us are slightly more genetically fortunate than others in this department, that's for sure. Though looks have always been important historically, and it's not new, because it's a selling point for our sexual fitness. So we're trying to showcase how good we are through our looks. And really, looks is very much the same as health. So if we like clear skin, that's actually a sign, medically speaking, that our internal organs, they're working well. If we like red lips, it's a sign that our heart is pumping blood around. So it really is, good looks is a way of showing that we are healthy and we are fit to reproduce. And so it's deeply ingrained in us, and it isn't just culture. And no, really, beauty is not just in the eye of the beholder. We are sadly really in agreement about who is attractive and who is not. Though having said that, standards do change. For example, in the 1960s, it was very trendy to be super skinny, like Twiggy, the famous model. And now I think it's a bit more trendy to have more curves. And personally, I'm just hoping for men with dark hair in their 50s to get into Vogue. I may have to wait for quite a long time. But what has changed is the social media, and they have clearly turbocharged the need to show ourselves to other people. And they can, of course, be very toxic. But I don't want to blame social media for everything, because, as mentioned, it is something that has been with us throughout history. But the emphasis has changed. And we suffer from something that we've talked about before in virtual well-being, and that's this idea of focusing illusion, so that we almost have tunnel vision and we think that, in this case, looks, but it could also be money or a new car or a new girlfriend, will make us extremely happy. And that is not the case. And it causes us a lot of suffering. And just for a moment, think about how much money can be made on people's low confidence in their looks. I'm talking about cosmetic surgery, fashion industry, the cosmetics industry. It's absolutely enormous. And it does look as if we as a society, to a large degree, turn a blind eye to this, even though that the consequences can be pretty catastrophic. I think it's true to say that we've never had such an unnatural relationship to our bodies. We hide ourselves away. We don't feel good about having a shower with other people of the same sex in tennis clubs or in the gym. We don't do these kind of things anymore. And even worse, lots of, especially young women, they suffer from anorexia. So the consequences of turning a blind eye can be disastrous, and even lives can be lost on this account. So how do we manage this? I think we've already agreed we can't get rid of this focus on good looks. But what we can do is that we can stop the war against our own bodies, at least to some degree. There will always be some war with ourselves, like for example, Lars Hansen doesn't want to go for a run, or I want to eat 3 chocolate cakes. That kind of war I think is acceptable. But this all-out war that I see, especially in my young female patients and female friends, it got to come to a stop. I've got a few ideas. So if we start out with a very basic psychological principle. So if you look at my left hand, that's a stimulus. And that can be a thought in my own head. It can be an emotion. Oh, I feel I don't look good. But it can also be outside pressure, people saying you got a big bottom or something else is wrong with you. And this is our response. And if we are not careful, stimulus and response are like glued together. But what the mature person can do is to create a space in between stimulus and response, because that space gives us the opportunity to choose our response. So within this space lies at least the kernel of our freedom, and maybe also a kernel of human growth. So don't respond impulsively to some kind of stimulus, either coming from your own head or from the outside. Create that space, and you'll be much, much stronger for it. So that was the first tip. The next idea is that we should, of course, be absolutely consciously aware of that focusing illusion. So we get our priorities right. And I love the Scottish writer Robert Louis Stevenson. He was an adventurer. He was the one who wrote Treasure Island. And he said very poignantly that to forget about ourselves is to be happy. And think about it. The happiest moments that we have, it's often when we engage in something else and thinking, oh, what do my fingers look like? What do my body look like? We engaged in something else, something purposefully, something with purpose. And that leads us straight on to the next piece of advice. And that's, of course, alternative sources of meaning and happiness than our looks. And I've said it before, but it's good to repeat this kind of stuff. It is, of course, relationships, engagement in other things, like, for example, usually helping other people or moving somewhere in our own minds, becoming more clever. So engagement and dedication, sense of purpose, learning new things. There's so many options. The world is wide open. Next piece of advice, very simple. Switch off those bloody social media, or at least reduce your time using them, because it does really normalize photoshopped bodies, and we never get a dose of reality because we never see other people naked in the modern world apart from on Pornhub or on these social media. So we get a totally distorted view of what we should look like. It's very unhealthy. The last piece of advice comes from one of my heroes, Erich Fromm, who was a psychoanalyst and a sociologist. And he wrote a very recommendable book in 1956 called The Art of Loving. And his advice is relatively simple to read, but it's not so simple to follow. Because we often think, especially us modern people, how can I enhance my chances of being loved? Or maybe even more basically, can I be loved? So we men, we may try to get bigger muscles. Women may try to go for cosmetic surgery or put on makeup or buy new expensive shoes that they can't afford. And what Fromm is saying, instead of thinking, can I be loved? Try to turn the focus on whether I can love other people. How do we love other people? How do we show other people love? How do we get closer to other people? It's actually a very healthy way of thinking. So in summary, we talked about looks. It's always been with us, will always be with us. We can't get rid of it, but it has been turbocharged, the focus, by social media. There's no doubt about that. But there are ways of managing it. Clearly there are. We talked about creating that space between stimulus, so your own thoughts, external pressure, and your response. And within that space, we can really grow as human beings. We talked about the awareness of the focusing illusion, this idea that if we focus in on something, that would make us very happy. But in fact, it is the basic things, relationships especially, that does make us happy. Spend less time on social media and more time in the real world, please. I think that's good sound advice. And then Eric Fromm talking about not being so focused about whether little narcissistic I can be loved. You try to see if you can love at a greater level, more intensely. That I think is very good. And to finish off this session on looks, I want to tell you a little story about a childhood friend and I. And he visited me many, many years ago in my student home, and because we were having a party, and we both witnessed how the girls were getting ready for the party with putting on expensive clothes and putting on makeup. And my friend very memorably said to me, these girls wouldn't be so obsessed with all of that if they only knew how desperate we were. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to catching you next time.